Okay, folks, good afternoon and welcome to our special ASH Lectureship of our winter months on this very delightful Fat Tuesday with just a trace of snow out there compared to the 2 feet we had this time last year. So we're glad that you arrived here safe and sound and looking forward to a good time together. As you're probably well aware, the ASH Lectureship is one of those wonderful events on campus made possible by the generosity of the late Stanley and Blanche Ash, who have been longtime friends of MCC. Stan Ash was the first chair of our board when our school was founded in 1965. He founded our MCC Foundation in 1981 and became for a long time its first president. And of course, the two of them made possible the Ash Science Building on this campus and the Ash Technology Center in our Greenville campus, and they've done so much for our school. So we are thankful to them today and the MCC Foundation and the Cultural Enhancement Fund for making this day possible for us. We are glad that you are here, whether you are a staff member or faculty or student or friend, trustee. We have a very special topic today, topic of migration in Michigan. This presentation today is in partnership with the World Affairs Council of West Michigan. Last night I had a chance to hear the same presentation at the Aquinas College for the World Affairs Council session of Great Decisions. And I assure you, we are in for a lot of very pertinent information. It will be a content-rich time for us today because we have with us the director of the Michigan Office for New Americans, which is under the Licensing and Regulation Authority of the state of Michigan. It is now a little over 2 years old. Governor Rick Snyder appointed our speaker today, Mr. Goei, as a director in January of 2014, and so it's now entering its second year of existence. I could say an awful lot about Mr. Goei. He arrived in America in 1960 from Indonesia via Holland, where he spent a few years. And when he arrived here, became mentored into business, established a very successful local business, and has received numerous awards for entrepreneurship over the years and also his promotion of diversity in the West Michigan community. He is the founder of the Goei Center, and he is certainly a much sought-after expert in the field of migration. He was just sharing with me that he had a dialogue with one of our presidents not too long ago when they met together in Ada. So I assure you that we have this morning with us an expert to guide us along these lines. I know one of the questions that we have, for example, is how do we perceive the immigration or the refugee situation with those coming from Syria, and where does that stand right now, and how should we view that with the concerns that we have for terroristic threats and so forth. So a very important conversation that we're going to enjoy, I know, today together. So please help me welcome to our podium Mr. Goei.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And I tell you, I'm so excited to be here. I know we did this presentation last night for the World Affairs Council in Grand Rapids. And I'll tell you that one of the interesting things about talking about this topic today, is the fact that we are in the presidential election year. It's like this conversation, the national conversation, and sometimes I listen to them and I just cringe. So as a disclaimer, I just want you to know, if I offend you because I say something that may have contradicted one of your candidates or a political party, that's not my intent. I'll do as much as I can to prevent this from becoming a political thing because it's an important topic for us to discuss. It's important for us to get to know more information about what is going on and what is some of the additional data that you may not have known or heard in our national conversation about immigration and refugees. But before I begin to do that, let me say thank you to Terry Smith and the Community Foundation for sponsoring this event, and also to Mr. Stanley, a member of the Board of Trustees, who has joined us here today for our conversation together. Before I do that, also, let me give you a few things of information about who I am. As Dr. Hautel told you, that I'm also an immigrant and also a refugee, and there is some distinction that we'll talk about a little bit later today. I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia, and my family, my parents, decided in 1954 that after President Sukarno took over as president, after some 300-some years of being a colony of the Netherlands, that because of President Sukarno's instructions, my dad was an educator, and he was being told what to teach in the schools, and he said this is not good for his children. And so my parents made the really great sacrifice and decided to leave and flee Indonesia. It wasn't as simple as, hey, let's get a plane ticket and let's leave. It was, government saying, sure, you can leave, but guess what? Everything you own is now ours. And you have literally left with a suitcase. And I really appreciate the sacrifice my parents made because my parents at that time had 6 boys. My mother was pregnant with the 7th child. Luckily, it was a girl, although it wasn't that good because she was spoiled. But so we left Indonesia with what we could take with us, and we started going to the Netherlands. And the reason we went to the Netherlands is because my parents thought that initially they were going to go from the Netherlands, catch a ship there, and settle and resettle into Suriname, which was another Dutch colony in northern part of South America. But while my father was waiting, while we were waiting there for the ship to take us, again, he had some friendships with some people in the Netherlands because of his connections to Indonesia. And while we were waiting, he was offered a teaching position in a Dutch school system, which he accepted. And we waited there and lived there for about 5.5 years. And I remember sitting around the dinner table in which my parents would talk, my father especially would talk about, boy, I wish I could take you children to America. Because in his mind and his understanding of America, it was a land of opportunity and a country where his children could succeed in whatever capacity they wanted to go and follow their dreams. And I think that's part of the immigrant story. That's part of our story as immigrants. When we look at America, we look at America as this land of opportunity and a nation that will welcome us and give us these opportunities to do whatever we aspire to do. So we arrived in January 9 of 1960 in the city of Grand Rapids. And on that slow news day, the Grand Rapids Press decided to take a picture of us arriving at the train station in Grand Rapids. So that's the front page. This is the original front page of the Grand Rapids Press, January 9, 1960. And what is interesting is that the headlines of that day, of January 9, 1960, included a headline that says, "More jobs for Michigan." Right? The more we think we change, the more we stay the same. Same conversations we have historically in our state. More jobs, always thinking about our economy. But what's also interesting about the headlines in this particular newspaper is that some of you weren't even born in 1960, I understand that. Nixon bid is entered in primaries. That interesting? And so here's the interesting thing, and we'll talk a little bit about this as part of not only the data that I'm going to show you and share with you, but here's the interesting thing about our arrival in Grand Rapids. So here we are, born in Jakarta, Indonesia, coming to the Netherlands, and then coming to the United States, sponsored by the Fuller Avenue Christian Reformed Church. We were met by deacons of the Christian Reformed Church, of that particular Fuller Avenue Christian Reformed Church, who helped settle us into our home and all that kind of stuff. They had all the Dutch names that you are familiar with. Vander, whatever. De Vos, Huizingas. So we walked off the train. We started speaking Dutch, and these Dutch people didn't know how to speak Dutch back. That was our first cross-cultural experience that we had, and it was great. And, we were, as a family, I remember we were taken to the home that they rented for us in the southeast side of Grand Rapids. And I remember my mother walking in this house, and this house was like huge. It was one of these old homes on Logan Street. I don't know if you're familiar with Grand Rapids. And she walked in, and she just couldn't believe the massive space in this house. Because in the Netherlands, there was no such thing as big homes, unless you were very, very rich. And then she opened the refrigerator, and the refrigerator was filled with food. And again, the deep appreciation, and it was just overwhelming for her. I mean, I still remember seeing her cry and expressing her appreciation to the families who helped us settle in. And I think that's the story of immigration. And what I want to do today is I want to share with you what I think is so important as we begin, because we continue our national conversation on immigration and refugee resettlement. What we need to begin to remember is that we can't forget our history. Because when we forget our history, we will repeat it. So I'm going to start with the refugee issue, because that's kind of the topic, of the day in our conversation. And I want to share some information with you, because what I sense in our national conversation that we hear, and I understand that's only a small part of the conversation, but what I sense is that we have forgotten our history. Because the things that I'm hearing today in regards of how we should treat Muslims, or those who come from Muslim countries, or those who come from Middle Eastern countries, specifically Iraq or Syria, is the same conversation that occurred in World War II, when the conversation was to justify the internment of Japanese Americans. If you look at the history, the conversation is very similar about the justifications of what we want to do, or what some political candidates want to do about Muslim Christians or Syrians or Iraqis. It is also a historical fact, that we did the same things to Germans, to German Jews in World War II. We know of a boat of German Jews who thought they were able to enter the United States, that were turned away and sent back to Germany, because we began to associate Germans with all the negative things that was going on in Germany. In fact, there was a story out that the Anne Franks and her family were ready to come to the United States. They were given all the paperwork necessary until we decided that, no, we are not going to accept any Germans, any Jews, because of the perception of what's going on in Germany. So I think it's important for us to know our history. I think it's important for us to know the data and the facts behind the benefits and the richness that immigration can bring to our country. So we're going to talk about refugees first, then we'll talk a little bit about immigration and what the policies are in the United States about immigrants, because there are two different groups, and there are distinct different policies for these groups. And so what I want to do is start to show you a video that I think will give you an idea of the vetting process that every refugee goes through. So here's the definition, a short summary definition of immigrants and refugees. Immigrants leave their country on their own free will. Refugees leave their country for safety and protection. Because if you talk to refugees, many of them don't even want to leave their country, but they have no choice. So that's the difference, and we'll talk about, and we'll start with the refugee topic first, and what I want to show you is a video of what the vetting process that refugees have to go through in order to come to the United States.
This is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson. Since the Syrian civil war began, more than 4 million people have fled that country, leaving their entire lives behind them. And the stories we've heard have been heartbreaking. Remember the tragic stories of children who drowned attempting to reach Europe with their families. That's why, once it was concluded that we can do it safely and responsibly, the President announced a plan to resettle at least 10,000 Syrian refugees in the United States within the next year. In the days since the Paris attack, many have tried to argue that accepting Syrian refugees, who, by the way, are mostly women, children, and families, means that we'd make America a more dangerous place. This ignores the reality that anyone who seeks and is approved for refugee status in the United States must first go through a rigorous security screening process. So let's walk through that process and what it looks like for a potential refugee. Meet Rima. Rima and her children have lost their home in Syria. They've made the dangerous journey out of the country, and now Rima is seeking refugee status in a place where she can keep her children safe. First, Rima must apply for refugee status through the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This is the international organization in charge of protecting and assisting refugees. For Rima to be considered a refugee, she must show that she's been driven from her home due to a, quote, well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, end quote. If Rima meets the above conditions, she may be referred for resettlement in a country such as the United States. But before she can enter the United States as a refugee, Rima must then undergo a security screening process that is more thorough than any other for people entering this country. She'll have a deep background check. Her biographic and biometric information will be cross-checked against law enforcement and intelligence databases. Rima will also have to pass an in-depth interview, including an interview with a specially trained DHS officer to determine her eligibility. If found eligible, she then receives a medical evaluation. From start to finish, this process includes the involvement of the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, and the Department of Defense. All refugees, including Syrians, go through these security screening measures, and Syrians receive an enhanced review during this process. Over 23,000 Syrian refugee applicants have been referred to us by the UNHCR. Only about 2,000 have been admitted. Throughout history, we've seen that America has become a better nation by welcoming refugees in times of crisis. So many refugees and their children have gone on to make great contributions to our American society. Albert Einstein and Elie Wiesel, two Jews displaced by Nazi Germany, went on to become great Americans. We've seen great athletes such as Nadia Comaneci and Luol Deng flee communism and the Sudanese Civil War, respectively. Taking in refugees at a time of crisis is simply the right thing to do. We can and we will continue to ensure our own security while doing our share to welcome men, women, and children who are refugees fleeing violence. This is the United States of America. We can, we must, and we will do both these things.
So the question becomes, here's again is a definition of an immigrant and refugee. So what about Michigan? What role does Michigan play in this whole refugee process? The United States of America has a policy that the president sets with the approval of Congress, and currently the number is about between 70 and 75,000 refugees are allowed to enter the United States on an annual basis. So it's not much in terms of what we see in terms of the magnitude of the challenge that is happening with refugees worldwide. And as an average, Michigan receives, roughly between 4 to 6% of the refugees that come here. Once they're approved and gone through all the vetting process, as you've just seen, then they come here and are placed through the resettlement agencies that have contracts with the federal government. And within the state of Michigan, there are several, including Bethany Christian Services, Lutheran Social Services, Catholic Charities, and others. And what they do is they identify the refugees, and then they try to place them with people or are related to them or friends of them, or if not, they'll try to place them in areas that are welcoming and has the necessary resources to be able to enfold them into their communities. So this is the average. In 2015, we went down to about 3,015 refugee arrivals. We went as high as over 4,000 the year before that. And here's where they resettle. And here's an interesting thing. I mean, it's like, we know we have a large refugee population in the southeast side, of Michigan, and a lot of that is part of the Arab American community that is, around the Dearborn area. But what's interesting is that the Grand Rapids area also welcomes a significant percentage of those refugees, and then the rest are in these particular, dominant areas. And then there's also some scattering in different cities as well, but these are the dominant cities that are resettling refugees in the state of Michigan. Again, recent refugee repopulation has come from these particular countries in the year of 2015. But there's a lot of different countries that represent the African nations, or Congo. We have a lot of those. Somalia. So there's other places that other countries that is part of what we call like African nations or East Asia. We do have a small percentage of these numbers of refugees coming here from Syria. So, as you know, we continue to have these between October 1, 2015 and December 2015, because our fiscal year ends September 30. And so we start October 1 as a new fiscal year. So this is what's been happening in the 2016 fiscal year. So that's part of the refugee program that is part of what we are seeing here in the state of Michigan. There are significant numbers that continue to be coming here. It will continue to be here, and I think that, and I know that President Obama has asked for an increase of 10,000 and targeting that extra 10,000 for Syrian refugees to be allowed to enter into the United States. As you remember from the video, there's a significant additional vetting process for refugees who are coming here or who want to come to the United States from Syria. And also, one of the things that you may or may not know is that this vetting process is not like you go in and you ask, for permission to be identified and classified as a refugee, and then you can just, come into any country of the United States. Some of these refugees, it takes them almost sometimes 3 years to finish the vetting process. And even after they finish the vetting process, it is not a guarantee that they will immediately come to the United States, because there's other steps that have to be taken. So the vetting process really is quite extensive, and certainly something that we want to make sure that happens. Although one of the things that I think is important for us to remember is that all these things that have happened that has caused some fear and some reactions from not only political leaders but others is the fact. This is the fact. The fact is that for all these incidents that have occurred in the United States, none of these incidents that have occurred have been perpetrated by anyone that went through this vetting process. We need to remember that. Does that mean it will never happen? No, we're all human beings. We're going to, somewhere along the line, someone may break down and create a problem for us. But as of today, none of these who have went through the vetting process have been part or participated in any of the attacks that have occurred in the United States. So let's go to immigration. So sometimes we hear the conversation about, that we should stop immigration. We should reduce the numbers of immigrants. What we don't remember is that if you look at the history, and I think I remember speaking to Mr. Lincoln just before the meeting and said, well, he was listing the European immigrants that came to this country and created a lot of great contributions to it. But you look at the immigration to Michigan and look at the different groups of peoples who have come to the state of Michigan. And I'm assuming that unless you're a native indigenous American person, you're probably one of these groups somewhere, if you trace it back far enough, right? 4th, 5th, 6th generation. So you see that, and then if you look at the history, And again, this is part of the challenge that I have for you as students and faculty, is to recognize that there's a history behind all these groups. You know, the discrimination that occurred against the Irish and Italians, I mean, if you remember those stories and then forward it to today and some of the groups that are now here experiencing similar experiences, it's probably because we forgot that history. And it's important for us not to forget that history. And that even though this can be used sometimes as a political situation, we also need to remember this is a humanitarian situation. You know, we're all people. We all have similar needs and similar likes and dislikes. So here again, this is the history of Michigan. This is who we are as a state. Lots and lots of different peoples, and that have brought different benefits and strengths to our state. Interestingly, from 1990 to 2013, our foreign-born population, you know, from 3.8 to 6.2%. We have probably a little over 600,000 immigrants who are living in the state of Michigan currently. So the policy for immigration that the federal government has is that they want to use immigration for four particular reasons. One is to reunify families. So if you happen to have immigrated to the United States, and this has happened many a times that I'm familiar with. I'm married to a Dutch-born woman, and I remember her telling a story about how her family came to the United States because her father's brother was already in the United States, and he was able to bring them here under this reunifying families visas. We also have a visa program under the federal government program that is based on skills for jobs that are not being filled by U.S.-born citizens. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And also about the refugees. We want to protect the refugees. And there's also one that promotes diversity. Because the United States government felt and still feels that diversity is still an asset that will help us as a country and strengthen us as a country. So that's basically what that is. And the family base, there's 480,000 family-based visas permitted under our current policy. And so there's a total of 675,000 available annually. So 480,000 are designated for family reunification purposes. The employment-based visas are many. And so some are temporary, some are permanent, that has a pathway to citizenship at some point. For those of you students, I'm not so sure, Gary, if there is international students here at Montcalm College, okay. But there are also visas, special visas for students, international students, who want to come to the United States and study. It's a J1, L1, and M1. But it's all different kinds of visas available. Here's something that you might be interested in. I think you have now in the Greenville area a Chinese-owned company, manufacturing company, and so they'll may use some of this for some international students or international talent to be able to stay here and work in their companies. So these are employer-based visas: EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4. Those are, and the criteria here is employers that can prove to the federal government that the opening in their company is not able to be filled by a U.S. resident. They have to prove it. And it's an extensive process for them to prove it. The other part of it is that any company that wants to apply for a special visa for that potential employee, the application process is quite expensive. It's between $5,000 and $8,000 per applicant. So it's not like, I just want to hire this person because I can pay them less, or I can, whatever the negatives has been out there. They have to make that commitment. And here's the other part. The EB 1, 2, 3, 4 employment-based visas, there are only 85,000 available in the whole United States. Last application cycle, last year's application, there were 175,000 applications submitted for one of these EB employment-based visas. That means that we're going to send back 90,000 talented individuals to the country, and instead of working to help our economy grow, they're going to compete against our economy. Now, here's the history again that we keep forgetting, right? Again, I want to go back. Please know our history, because if we don't, we'll repeat it. During the President Clinton's years, when the technology boom was growing and growing and growing, Congress approved an increase in these employment-based visas to 140,000. The world didn't fall apart when it happened. We grew our economy, but when the law sunset, Congress didn't want to retain it, so we went back to our 85,000. The EB-5 investment is not an employer investment, but it is an investment program for international individuals who, at a minimum, with certain conditions that have to be met, can invest $500,000, and if they can create 10 full-time jobs for U.S. citizens in 2 years, they will be given a permanent green card, which will allow them and their families to then, after 5 years, to apply for citizenship. It's either $500,000 minimum investment in what they call targeted employment areas, TEA, which are traditionally speaking high unemployment areas or rural areas. If not in those areas, their minimum investment has to be $1 million. With the stipulation, again, that they have to produce 10 full-time jobs within 2 years. So let's, for example, if you had a project that says it's going to cost $20 million, and we want to identify $10 million investors, that project has to create 100 jobs for U.S. residents in order for those investors to be given a green card. So it doesn't come from, yes, people could accuse it of buying citizenship, but in reality, it is creating jobs. So it's not always the positives that we hear. We always have a tendency to hear the negatives. So that's part of the program. Why immigration? Why are we talking about it now? Again, if you look back at the history, the contributions that the Dutch, the Irish, the Polish, the Germans have made in the early years of immigration, and then when you look at what the other ethnic countries have come to United States, to Michigan, have contributed, we know that immigration is a tool, is an asset for us to meet our growing global economy. So we have, in 2000, 2009, we lost almost 800,000 jobs because of the downturn in our automotive and manufacturing economy. We were the only state in the nation to lose population in the last census, the only state, because there was such an outmigration of people who said, I need a job. I got to go someplace where there's jobs available. And in Michigan, during that decade, we just didn't have them because we kept losing them because of our economy. So also the other part of it is that we are an aging population. By the year 2040, some of us are going to be 65 years or older. I'm there already, but I just pretend I'm there, not yet. And also the thing, the studies show, and this is data. This is not some, I'm going to throw this statistic out there because that will, scare the living daylights out of people. The reality is that Georgetown University did a study on behalf of the state of Michigan and said, and this was done in 2010, and it said by the year 2018, you will need to replace and fill 274,000 STEM-related field jobs. I mean, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And we just don't have enough U.S. students taking that STEM field track currently. So we have to find a way to identify a source, a talent pool for that. Well, we do know that international students are able to, or have a tendency to take more STEM field education tracks. I see Gary standing up. Does it mean I'm about ready to go? Oh, you're okay. All right, so, but here's the other part that we need to start looking at. What we need to start looking at is look at the third bullet point. What do we hear about Hispanics and Latinos in our general conversation, about who they are, what they are, and that type of thing? Here's what you need to also know, is that the purchasing power of Michigan's Latinos totaled $9.8 billion. But what do we hear about that particular ethnic group a lot of times? Not very positive things. The purchasing power of Michigan of Asian Americans totals about $11.8 billion. That is a lot of revenues that is in the state of Michigan that they are being contributed to your and my quality of life. They're spending it here in the state of Michigan. Do we know that? Do we hear that in our accounts on the media and in the TVs and all that kind of stuff? If we do, we don't hear it very often. Talk about Arab Americans. The conversation about this particular group of peoples recently has been very, very toxic. But here's what is happening. In the 4-county Detroit metropolitan area, Arab Americans' employment and money they earn, money they generate through their businesses, $7.7 billion. They contribute $544 million to our state tax revenues. Now think about this. You pull that out of our state budget, that's going to impact your and my quality of life and the services that's available. These are productive, energetic, creative individuals, just like you and I are. And they want to contribute to the state of Michigan and also to the United States of America. I don't know if you remember the story of the Syrian scientist that came to Michigan. He's living currently in Troy, but he was the one that became a national story because a national publication picked up on his story. His wife and his 2 daughters were killed in a bombing attack. He and his other surviving children are now in the United States. President Obama highlighted him. He was part of the audience in the State of Union address. But when he came and arrived in Michigan at the Detroit airport, I was fortunate enough to be part of the press conference and listen to him talk. And what he said is really interesting. He said, I don't want to continue to be labeled as a refugee. I want to become a productive part of America. And this man is a scientist, and from what I understand, he has been offered all kinds of jobs already. But that's the thing, right? We don't hear very positive things about the contributions and the assets that refugees and immigrants are to our state of Michigan. So here's the Hispanic population. They have 10,000, almost 11,000 owned businesses. So they employ over 18,000 employees. Asian Americans, the same thing, 21,000 businesses. They employ over 66,000 employees. Their receipts were over $7 billion. Here's an interesting statistics, and agriculture, as you all probably may well know, is our third largest economy. It's an over $100 billion economy, and so But what is interesting, which I didn't even know until I began to do the research, is that 28% of the farms are owned by immigrants. And that will continue as we receive more immigrants and refugees from countries that are and have an agricultural background. So let me do this, because Gary's up here, and I got to be aware that he's going to tell me to stop. But here's the impact of immigration and what it has. Again, the bottom line: 76% of patents awarded the top 10 patent-producing U.S. universities in 2011 had at least one foreign-born inventor. Companies, started by immigrants. Right here, one of the largest companies in the state of Michigan was started here in Greenville. Who knows it? Yeah, Meijer, right? From a little Greenville grocery store to what it is today, it was started by a Dutch immigrant. Here's what we need to do. We need to create a welcoming culture. I think that what's going to happen, we're going to see more international businesses, and I think Michigan will be a beneficiary of those international investments. Because Governor Snyder is very committed to going out and finding new international businesses to come and relocate in Michigan. Here's the challenge for you and I. How do we make sure that they stay here? How do we make sure that immigrants and talents and everything like that will choose Michigan as a destination? And that's up to you and me. Because you see, just like you and I, we don't want to be someplace where we are not wanted. So the challenge for you is to begin to understand, not to give up your traditions or cultures, but to also embrace other people's traditions and cultures. Because when we expand our horizons, because not every one of us is going to be able to travel around the world, right? But wouldn't it be great if we could sit down with someone who comes from another part of the world and can share with you their experiences and their culture and their richness of their culture? It's a cheaper way than maybe traveling across the oceans, right? So let me do that, and then let's see. Okay, this is just some, again, recommendations. And I'll be more than happy to stay behind and kind of give you more in-depth. But here are some of the things that we're suggesting we ought to do. And here are some cities that have intentionally targeted immigrants, and refugees resettlement as a way to revitalize their neighborhoods, their cities, their communities. There are some great stories here, and again, I can give you some more information about that. And here's the thing that I want you to remember. The future is in the hands of those who choose to understand it. If you don't want to understand it and just live by the sound bites, I think you will only impoverish ourselves. So please, my challenge to you today is to make sure that you understand and remember your history so that we don't repeat it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goei. A lot of very helpful and pertinent information, and you've covered a lot of ground for us in just this short time. Mr. Goei agreed to reserve these last few moments for a time of question and answer, and we'll dismiss in a few moments. So if you would ask your question as loudly as you can. Right here, sir.
What happens to the 97% that don't pass the vetting process, the 3-year vetting process? Do they go elsewhere, or?
Yeah, they have to, because they won't be admitted to the United States if that's what their goal is. So, and we can only take so many because we are capped at so many also. So I think unfortunately, those individuals that do not pass our vetting process will have to find another way to find a safe haven for them and for their families.
What do they do for the 3 years, those who are being vetted?
They're in the camps. They stay in the camps.
In a camp outside of America?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they can't, Yeah. And here, let me tell you a story about, and I was talking to a young lady who was an attorney in Dearborn, and she said to me, theoretically, I knew what was going on because I try to keep up with the developments in the refugee situation. But last month or 2 months ago, she was able to visit the refugee camps, and she comes back and says, "There is no way that I can describe to you how horrendous the conditions are for these families and these children in these refugee camps. So President Obama is suggesting 10,000, so I know that Senator Peters has suggested more, like I think around 200,000. I mean, there's other numbers that's being thrown around. And I know that the Governor Snyder made a statement about pausing the process or pausing the immigration. First and foremost, he didn't stop it. He never said he wants to stop it. He said in other statements after that initial statement, he just said he's interested in knowing from the federal government how they're going to put more resources in bringing in more, refugees to the United States, because he wants to make sure that if we increase our number of refugees, that we don't decrease our number of persons needed to vet these individuals to make sure that we keep our country safe. So he said, and he's made this a public statement, that those who are already in the pipelines and have already been vetted and just waiting, that he's not going to stop those individuals from coming to Michigan. So, and we have, since that statement, I think the numbers is that we have like 400 refugees have already come. And he doesn't target Syrian refugees, he just says refugees as a whole. So, yes.
Someone else? Right here?
I got a quick question on, hopefully, I know it's maybe a broad answer, but I'm just wondering, in your conversation about the contribution to our society, with not only just from a monetary viewpoint, but I know a lot of Americans would say from an ideology viewpoint, what they're also contributing to our society. And I'm sure this has come up in your conversations with people that you talk to.
What immigrants contribute to our society at large?
From their ideology.
Well, so one of the negatives that we hear is that the Sharia law thing, right? They want to bring that into our country, into our nation. They want to bring, other religions that are not familiar to us, who come from a Judeo-Christian backgrounds, right? All those kinds of things. I think that we have to look at that in this way. I don't think that any one of us will agree to practice some of the things that they are being, accused of practicing in terms of their own ideology or their own religion or that type of thing. I think we will hear things that are different. Now, I'm a Christian, so I hear things and I say, no, that doesn't match with my beliefs and my faith and understanding, right? So I think what we need to do is recognize that we just need to be able to share what our belief systems are. And that we don't lump everybody together under one particular category or one box. If you, and I don't know, and I don't proclaim to know all the religions of the world, but from what I've been told, that the fundamentals of the religion, there is one fundamental, which is to take care of people and be good about it. Now, you can argue, the way to salvation, all this, but that is the fundamental that is found in every tenet of the different religions that are becoming part of our society, part of our nation. So that, I think, is important for us to remember. The other part is, this is the year of 2016. This is the year of the monkey for Asians, right? Well, maybe you don't know that. This is Happy New Year. February 8th is the Happy New Year for those of you who are Asian ethnicity. And it's kind of an interesting year to think about, what does that mean? And if you look at that definition, so I'm not going to tell you, because I want you to research it. There's some very good things about the year of the monkey, right? And now listen. Okay, so I like Chinese food. So would you have known hot and sour soup or egg rolls without having Chinese immigrants come here? So the culturally, and the dances, and the artists, I mean, you think about that. The contributions they make that enhances our quality of life culturally as well as economically. And I think we need to start spending time to learn more about those things as much as we try to learn about the things that we are somewhat concerned about.
You mentioned hot and sour soup last night, and I thought about that ever since then. I'm so hungry for a bowl of hot and sour soup. We have time for one last question. If you have anything burning to ask our guest today, Mr. Goei? In the back, yes, sir. What limits of the vetting system time frame are there?
You know, I don't think there's any limits. I think the federal government, the United States government, wants to make sure that whatever it does, it minimizes any potential harm that could occur because we've allowed these individuals to come into our country. I think they're always, it's like anything else, they're always finding ways and trying to find ways to improve whatever they're doing. And so, and like I say, the statistics show us that what they're doing is pretty good right now. And I think they're going to take their time. And that's why it takes some of these individuals sometimes 2 to 3 years to even get through the vetting process, let alone having them come to the United States. So if you remember this, the video, 28,000 Syrian refugees applied for a refugee status to come to the United States. Less than 2,000 were approved in that process. So we got to, and so, we're still trying to, and like the gentleman said, what are you going to do with the other 90%? I don't know what happens to them, to be honest with you. But the vetting process is very stringent, and I think the federal governments really want to make sure that they do this very, very well.
Let's say thank you one last time to our guests today.
Thank you.
Appreciate the illumination. I have a whole new set of eyes through which to view immigration, and we're so thankful for that. By the way, we did not coordinate on the brown corduroy jacket. That was just serendipitous. Our last cultural event of this week comes on Friday night, our annual Valentine's dance in the gym. It's free, live band music, kind of like the Glenn Miller sound. A lot of swing and a lot of rumba and a lot of fun, so feel free and be a part of that as well. Mr. Bing Goei, Bing like Bing Crosby, Goei like Joey. He'll be around afterwards to answer more questions for you, so please feel free and linger behind. Thank you. Have a great day.
And just remember this, about the brown corduroys, here's another principle that we ought to remember. We probably have more in common than we have in differences. All right, man. Take care. Thanks.